I was at work on the last day before I went on maternity leave early. I was 8 months pregnant, yet I'd been so exhausted for the previous 2 days that I couldn't function. That morning, I felt befuddled, fatigued, and listless, and I discovered my perineal area had turned entirely blue. I'd been complaining so badly during my pregnancy that I figured whatever it was could wait. That following day, I had a doctor's visit at 2 p.m. I was going to beg him for an official work write-up, but I wasn't going back until I felt more energized. I was in the canteen, finishing up the baby shower that my coworkers had prepared for me, when the phone rang. It was for me. As a woman went by and asked, "When are you going to have that baby?" I stood up and walked over to the phone. I'd grown tired of the query and my standard response, "Not soon enough." "Any minute," I said this time. "Precognition?" "No, I don't believe so." But that was purely coincidental. When I answered the phone, it was my spouse. He never phoned me at work, so I was concerned. He called to say that the deal on the car he wanted had gone through, that he had traded in his beat-up old Gremlin for the new Grand Prix, and that he would be dropping our 4-year-old daughter off at the sitter's house early. He wouldn't be home the remainder of the day, and he felt compelled to inform me of this. He'd then go for work around 2:30 p.m. It was 10 a.m. The year was 1986. Cell phones were unheard of among ordinary people, therefore this call proved to be fortuitous. I felt like I was going to wet my pants as I stood there listening to him on the phone. For a split second, I believed my water had burst, and then fluid rushed out of me with such intensity that it seemed to explode onto the floor, splattering everywhere. When I looked down, I saw my own blood streaming out of me at such a rapid pace that I felt dizzy. I'm not sure if I'd already lost so much blood that I was passing out, or if I fainted from the sight of my own blood. "Oh my God, Butch," I yelled into the phone. "I'm going to die. You've got to come here right now." Then, I tossed the phone across the room as hard as I could. My coworkers, all of whom were female, surrounded me and assisted me in getting to the lunch table. One of them dashed off and dialed my doctor's number. Just 2 days previously, I'd posted vital phone numbers to call if something went wrong, and my supervisor, Kathy, subsequently told me how grateful she was that I had. The doctor told them to bring me to his office, oblivious to how much I was bleeding. Plans had been made for that, but my condition had deteriorated to the point where I couldn't even sit up, and I had begun to drift in and out of consciousness, despite the fact that I was awake. I kept hearing water dripping and begged them multiple times to turn it off. It kept dripping, and I turned around to discover that I'd bled so much that it had trickled down to the canteen's wall, about 15 feet, and down the canteen side, about 12 to 15 more feet. Kathy overheard my horrified screams and responded, "That isn't dripping water. It's made of blood." At that moment, I realized I was going to die. I knew I was detached from the whole event, not panicking, not worried at all, not like I believed I always would if my life was in danger, even for a second. I kept my cool. The canteen fiasco persisted. Confusion erupted over where I should go, and my department boss walked in and broke it up, asking everyone to go and Kathy to phone the ambulance. I was on my way to the hospital. At that time, I didn't care. I didn't feel any discomfort. I wasn't worried about my or the baby's safety. I just knew I felt at ease. When the ambulance arrived, the attendants were informed that I had a nosebleed. They walked in, completely unafraid. "The blood has been completely wiped up." The female attendant asked if it was my first pregnancy, and she motherly patted my hand. I knew she didn't get it, and I didn't feel compelled to explain that I had 4 or 5 softball-sized clots in my pantyhose. They handled the situation as if it were an ordinary visit to the hospital. They walked out with me on a stretcher. They didn't start an intravenous drip. They never glanced beneath my dress, and they only asked if I was in labor. For the ride to the hospital, no lights or sirens were activated. We were there in about 5 minutes because it was only 6 blocks away. They unloaded me, took the elevator up to the 3rd floor, and parked me in the hallway in front of the nurse's station, where they placed my chart on the counter. "Someone will be there in a minute," the girl smugly stated. To this day, I don't believe she thought I was in any danger. She seemed to think of me as a nervous young woman ready to birth a baby who had suffered a minor nosebleed. I lay there for a while, although I'm not sure how long. This is when I began to feel disconnected from my body. It was cold at first, but not unbearably so. I had the sensation of floating a little, of drifting in and out of my body a little. There's no above view or anything of the sort. However, I overheard talks in other rooms. At the same time, nothing significant. I noticed the ambulance attendants in a break room buying Lance cheese crackers from a vending machine. It appeared to be stuck in some way. I appeared to be looking down from the top of the door frame. Then I was back in the hallway, staring at the ceiling. I was completely at ease. I felt pleased, free, and as if a weight had been removed off my shoulders. I momentarily considered my husband and my young daughter, how much they would miss me, and how I needed to be there for both of them. But I wasn't sure I wanted to stay. I desired to float. I wanted to be free again, but the weight of my body kept drawing me back in. I kept feeling the need to leave, but I also felt as if I wasn't allowed to leave for some reason. Before I could depart, I was forced back down into my body, but I didn't feel any pressure. I lay there for a long time, yet long enough to almost bleed to death. I turned to see as I felt a warmth move close to me. I couldn't speak since I didn't have any energy left. Just turning my head took all of my energy. While lifting the sheet, I noticed a nurse approach me and say, "You don't look too good." She yelled a code. People started running from all directions. The cart began to roll, and I felt like I was being left behind for a split second before my view changed and I was gazing up at the ceiling again. I stuck with my body from then on. I got concerned about the baby all of a sudden. I had the impression he was no longer alive. I was terrified and perplexed. Personnel were racing around, initiating intravenous drips, a blood transfusion, and connecting monitors for the baby and me. I felt a rush of warmth. The blood and medicine that was being administered hit me like a warm blanket being dropped on me. I was feeling energized, so I inquired about the baby. Is he still alive? Nobody responded to my question. My spouse and my daughter entered the room. I told her I loved her and that she needed to be a nice girl for Daddy while Mommy was ill. I passed out, but I have no recall of what happened. I was awakened by a nurse disconnecting the baby monitor. I inquired as to why she was removing it. She didn't respond. I advised her to keep it turned on. She kept yanking it off. I was adamant. She left it on and dashed out the door. The doctor entered the room. He informed my husband and me that the baby had died. They knew I had less than a 30% chance of surviving surgery to remove the baby, so they decided to let me give birth naturally. I mustered the courage to inform him that the baby was alive. I wanted the monitor to remain turned on. When no one was in the room, I could hear his heartbeat. It was impossible, according to the doctor. The baby had no heartbeat right now, and he was pointing to the monitor, attempting to accept the truth that he was no longer alive. It was now up to me to survive. The nurse attempted to remove the monitor once more, and I yelled for my husband to intervene. "Butch, don't allow them. He's still alive." I could hear his heartbeat. Yes, I did. With a sympathetic gaze, the doctor signaled for the nurse to depart. The monitor abruptly began to bleep. After all, my baby's heart was beating. We were in the operation room in 7 minutes. The baby was revived, and I was on my way to recovery. I returned home 5 days later, physically exhausted, but with a renewed sense of purpose. I didn't fear death the way I do today. I didn't actually see or speak to any beings at the time, but I did feel my body release several times, just to be pulled back in. I had a brief moment of liberation, of being released from the limits of the box I was in, and it was exciting. I knew whatever this release was, it wasn't going to be a nightmare. Physically, It took me a year to recover. During that time, I spent endless hours on the floor with Thomas and my daughter Julie, training him to sit up, roll over, and exercise his small legs. He didn't do well. His head had grown out of proportion to the rest of his body. The pediatric group frequently advised me not to expect miracles. Thomas had an APGAR, or appearance, pulse, grimace, activity, respiration score of 3 at birth. This was vital. It was rechecked at 6 p.m., 5 minutes later. No one understood the extent of the damage that may have been done during the time he didn't have a heartbeat. He was barely past the benchmark score of 5. Unbeknownst to me, the placenta had pulled away from the uterus prematurely, and a big chunk of the blood supply that I was meant to be giving him had escaped and puddled in my uterus. I was hemorrhaging slowly and internally, with no visible indicators other than a blue perineal area and excessive paleness and weariness. The average lady loses her kid during this occurrence, and if the child survives, brain damage results from a lack of oxygen. The consequences for the youngster are frequently disastrous or death. Sometimes the mother dies, and if she survives, she usually needs a hysterectomy to halt the bleeding. This is something I've been told numerous times. My situation was unique. Thomas didn't turn over, sit up, or even show any interest in standing up until he was 11 months old. All he did was lie there and smile while his head grew enormously and his body remained infant-sized. I began to dread doctor visits and all their negativity. I despised people telling him that something was wrong, that he should be doing more, prepared for the worst, and praying for the best. I refused to accept it. I maintained his daily physical therapy on the floor, and when he wasn't on the floor, I held him all the time. I didn't want to put him in daycare because I was afraid he'd go behind if he sat in a crib all day. When I was alone, I would cry. I didn't want this to be a hindrance for him, and I prayed fervently. Then Thomas rolled over one day. I sobbed as I dialed the doctor's number. He sat up a week later, and before the end of the month, he was taking his first steps. I expected a miracle and received one. His physique began to develop, and by the age of 2, he was a regular, healthy kid. Thomas is now 15 years old. He's a sweet kid who's close to me and has more than made up for his unfortunate start in life. He has grown to 6 feet tall and 230 pounds. He wears a shoe size 13. Nobody thinks he was ever meant to be cognitively challenged. I feel that all of the events occurred in some order to allow me to experience this. Even on the verge of death, I had strange feelings and experiences that were reassuring. My understanding of life grew somewhat deeper, and it has continued to grow through time. I didn't mention that we all took a snooze one afternoon, a few weeks after I brought Thomas home. Thomas slept for 4 hours every night, whereas Julie didn't sleep at all and instead sat on her bed and played. I figured I'd take a 15-minute nap on the couch, and since I'd always been a light sleeper, I wasn't too concerned about Julie being awake. She'd spend at least that long in bed. I jumped on the couch and fell into a deep, deep sleep, unlike anything I'd ever experienced before or since. I recall lying down but not falling asleep. As folks say, I passed out as soon as my head hit the pillow. I closed my eyes and felt as if I were about to collapse. I felt as if I opened my eyes and was surrounded by blinding brightness. It resembled soft, sunshiny light, except it was whiter. I was walking along a sidewalk when I noticed a gorgeous creature I recognized as an angel, strolling down the other side in the opposite direction. As I turned to face him, he turned to face me, and I found myself standing in front of him. He was stunning, with long, silky white hair, with some waves and a flowing white robe clasped at the waist with a thick white thread, and the neckline drew my attention. It was cut quite low, almost to the waist, and exposing his chest. It appeared to be made out of wax and had numerous muscle incisions in it. He was quite handsome, and his eyes were piercing blue, though I could only glance momentarily into them. I fixed my gaze on his chest, which was higher than my head. He appeared to be incredibly tall, muscular, and fit, while also being friendly and forceful. Oh, he had massive swooping wings that flowed from his back. They were dazzling white and thin, arched up above his head. I was in amazement and felt so humbled that I couldn't talk. "I have something very vital for you to do," he said telepathically. "What is it?" I wondered, but said nothing. "You'll know when the time comes," he added, hearing my thoughts. "But you have a crucial task ahead of you." I felt unique. I felt adored and as though I was shining on the inside. I couldn't fathom what someone like me could be expected to do, but I was prepared for whatever came my way. I didn't feel insignificant, nor did I feel threatened. I felt strong and capable. I was confident in my ability to complete whatever task lay ahead of me. I felt compelled to ask more questions, but I realized I didn't have to. All I needed to know was this. I then opened my eyes. The room's radiance faded to the gloomy light of sunset. I looked at the time to see how long I'd slept and was astounded to see that I had slept for 3 hours. I leapt up and dashed to my 4-year-old daughter's room, terrified that I would find her gone, hurt, or in serious trouble. I'd never left her up for so long before. I was terrified. She was notorious for getting herself into all sorts of mishaps, but she remained deep sleeping. I'm not sure how long she slept because I fell asleep before she did. She, on the other hand, never slept. I couldn't believe she'd slept till the sun went down. I went to check on Thomas. He was starting to move around and wake up. I was really astounded that it had been so silent for so long that I'd slept for 3 hours. And I remembered the dream. I sat on the couch for a long time, ruminating on the specifics. It's something I'll never forget, and I've never had another like it. I referred to it as a dream, but it was much more. I was convinced it was real at the time, and I'm still persuaded it is. I just don't understand the connection between my dream and this event. The depth and realism are incomprehensible. I'm still not sure what my unique mission is. Perhaps it was staying at home with Thomas until he was able to mature fully. Maybe it's still waiting for me down the road. In any case, I'm prepared. I'm prepared for whatever may come my way. I'm looking for a method to go against the grain and do something good for someone. I try to find ways to be understood. I'm now more compassionate. I'm sensitive to other people's accounts of the same event. I believe these things occur, whether in our imaginations or in the enormous field of energy that surrounds us. I don't have answers. I truly don't have any queries. It isn't up to us to figure out yet.